Around 70 Australian disaster response specialists have arrived in Vanuatu to help carry out search and rescue missions following this week's earthquake. Joining me live is Vanuatu Business Resilience Council Chairman Glenn Craig. Glenn, really appreciate you coming on there from Port Vila. We understand that there's still people under collapsed buildings. Can you give us a sense of what is happening on the ground right now and the scale of the search and rescue efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fairly limited into the CBD, and so we've had 7 to 8 buildings that have suffered sort of catastrophic failure, of which 3 of them are very, very serious, where we've had the buildings actually pancake down. The one that everyone's seen in the media, there was one downtown, a surf shop where we actually lost the entire building, and that's where most of the fatalities have occurred. So that's been fairly horrific. And what we're trying to do is with the Australian and New Zealand Defence Forces or search and rescue personnel that have come in, is just go through there and see who's still around that has survived. We understand that there are a couple of people. Yesterday there were 3 people removed alive. Unfortunately, there were also fatalities from the one downtown. There's one building close to the airport that is still not being worked on by the Vanuatu personnel, but the Australian and New Zealanders have started working on that overnight.
I guess information is limited and it changes all the time, but is there any estimations about how many people are trapped in those collapsed buildings?
We estimate that we think that there's 3 that are trapped in the one downtown. At what whether or not they're alive or not, we don't know. In the building out of town, there's been no indication that there's people alive in there, as far as I'm aware. 2 levels did completely pancake, so it looks like unfortunately there will be fatalities in that one rather than live recovery.
Glenn, has there been any aftershocks?
Yeah, many. We had 18 yesterday. We had another 10 overnight. There was a larger one at 5.4 this morning. Obviously the concern is not so much for new damage, but just the buildings that have been affected, just going, more damage on top. That's the big concern we've got at the moment. But otherwise, they've been much smaller in scale, obviously, than the large one that we had.
And when those aftershocks happen, does it slow down? Do the rescue efforts have to stop while it's going on? Does it slow things down, or is it having not much of an impact?
I presume it does. I'm not an expert in that area, but I dare say that they will be taking that into account fairly comprehensively to make sure that they're securing the sites in case of that. Those 3 main buildings, there was the embassy building with New Zealand, that we had New Zealand, France, UK and the USA that lost a lower level, and then we had the one out at the airport that was the 2 levels. I'd say those buildings are the ones that we're most concerned with. When you're driving through the CBD, I drove through this morning at 5 a.m. You actually, apart from this one building down, you wouldn't know much had happened. You look around and you think, oh, it's a little bit messy and there's a few signs that are hanging down and things, but otherwise cosmetically it looks fairly good. I must say that the damage has been really isolated to these buildings in the CBD, a couple there and one out at the airport area. And then it's been a lot of landslides, as you would have seen behind the wharf, and also out in the rural communities. We've got a lot of landslips out there, and that's where a lot of the unknown is, as well as was anyone under these at the time. But in terms of the general, like out in the villages and the communities, there's been no relocate. People haven't had to relocate. The houses are fairly much undamaged. It's all almost as per normal. The markets were open yesterday. Supermarkets, the majority were open. We got power on in a lot of the CBD and the suburbs last night, and water came on yesterday as well. Communications are still an issue. We're all living off Starlink at the moment, and we're hoping to have full comms coming up in the next couple of days once the cable landing station's repaired. We're on the Southern Cross cable, and that's where our issue is.
Right.
But the people are resilient. It's been good to see. Everyone's just picked in and got on with it.
Yeah, well, Glenn Craig, we really appreciate you coming on and giving us a sense about what's happening on the ground there this morning.